We are going to be talking about US v. Google, and I'll read from the United States District Court for the District of Columbia and Judge Amit Mehta, who says Google is a monopolist and it has acted as one to maintain its monopoly. And I've got some bullet points that I'll read here just to set the table. This case was filed in 2020 by the Trump administration's DOJ. It was prosecuted by Jonathan Cantor and the Biden administration's DOJ. The case centers on the allegation that Google has suppressed competition among general search engines by paying billions of dollars to operators of web browsers and phone manufacturers to be their default search engine. Most infamously, there is a deal with Apple that makes Google the default search engine in the Safari browser on Macs and iPhones. Google receives almost 95% of all general search queries from mobile phones, and Google paid Apple $20 billion for that privilege in 2022.
Yeah, just to clarify that, because it's worded a little weird. Of mobile search queries, Google gets 95%. It's not that 95% of Google's search queries are for mobile phones. But yeah, but that's also Apple. It's also Samsung. It's basically every OEM and the carriers, to the extent they sort of customize the phones that they sell, which, you know, applies to sort of those super cheap phones you get that are kind of like random brand names.
Mm-hmm.
But you can, you know, sign up and you'll get your whole family and get a free phone. The carriers like decide what goes on there.
And you'll be using Google if you buy one of those cheap
That's
phones.
Right. Yep.
In 2020, Google's internal modeling projected that it could lose between 60 and 80% of its iOS search volume should it be replaced as the default search on Apple devices, which would translate into net revenue losses between $28.2 and $32.7 billion. And in a 2015 presentation, Google expressed confidence in its standing among Apple users, but warned that its position is, quote, still very vulnerable if defaults were to change. That's from the holding itself. And then, of course, a note on my beloved Firefox. Google was paying $400 million a year to be the default search engine on Firefox, over 80% of Mozilla's budget. So the future is uncertain on that front. Google is appealing this holding, and a hearing on proposed remedies in the wake of this holding is set for September 6th. So get your popcorn ready. Ben, as we wrap our arms around what's happening here, there are a lot of different directions to go, but I want to start with the Google Apple history. We've mentioned this before on the show, but I do think the Maps history is really important context for the Google Apple search deal. So can you provide people with a Cliff Notes version of that story and how it relates to this case?
Yeah, sure. And just one quick note on your summary. This thing, Google makes payments. Just to clarify, it's not Google saying, hey, Mozilla, we'll give you $400 million.
Right.
It's saying we'll give you a revenue share of the revenue derived from searches that start from your browser. Mm-hmm. And so it does vary by usage. So if Mozilla suddenly got super popular again, they would make more. If they became, you know, continued on the trend, they would, right. If Andrew bails, they would make less. But just that is sort of a point of clarity. They're not like directly paying. They're just saying, hey, we will share revenue with you. And it is a useful distinction, I think, in Google's defense, which we can maybe sort of get to in a little bit. But yeah, this question, the real question in this case, if you sort of zoom out, this idea that, look, hey, if you're a monopoly, you have to follow different rules. That's sort of, you know, a rule of thumb by and large under sort of antitrust law. And what's interesting about this case is I think it actually, the real question this case puts forward, and what I was trying to get to in my article this week, is to raise the question in people's minds, not about whether or not Google is guilty here, but whether or not the law actually, what does it mean to actually grapple with the implications of this law, of this rule that monopolies have to act differently? So in this case, it does, a big question in the case, and what Google will probably push on appeal, is this question of, are defaults the same as some sort of lock-in? If Google was making payments and saying it has to be Google on your device, I think this is more of an open and shut case, that they're just straight off buying off sort of whoever it might be.
Distribution channels, yeah.
Google is saying here, no, look, it's a revenue share anyone can bid to be the default. And by the way, anyone can change the default. You can go into your settings on your iPhone or whatever device that you have, and you can change the default search engine. And so, and Google's point is, it's a competition to be the default, which by the way is not lock-in because you can change it. And we just happen to win that competition. And oh, by the way, if there's a competition, how is it fair that we can't compete in a competition? And it's honestly a powerful sort of pushback, like because you think about this idea that, okay, so the sort of case in the DOJ's favor is that, number one, defaults actually are really powerful. Now, should that be a matter of law? Just because most people don't know about defaults or don't go to the trouble to change it, does that make it sort of illegal? So number one, how powerful are defaults? That's sort of a question. And is that really any sort of lock-in? But then number two, and this gets to the core premise of the law, is it right to say that Google, because you're a monopoly, you can't compete to be this default placement, which, by the way, you're not buying one off. You're just offering sort of everyone else is offering payments. You're offering a revenue share. Why can't you do it? And if you say the answer is, sorry, Google, you can't do that. Defaults are too powerful and you're a monopoly, so you can't make these deals. What you are saying, and everyone who applauds this case, including myself, has to be honest about this, is that we're saying, your competitors like Microsoft, it's not just that we're leveling the playing field. We're giving them a substantial advantage relative to you, because now Microsoft goes in and bids for the default placement, and they can offer a much lower price because the biggest competitor in the market isn't even in the auction. And by the way, you're also saying to the OEMs like an Apple, like a Samsung, like everybody else, you're going to get a lot less money because you can't sell this to the company that can pay the most, and pay the most not because they are being nefarious, but because they have the most volume and the most, we talk about volume matters for ads. They have the best sort of search ad monetization. So they pay more as a function of being better. It's all sort of integrated and intertwined. And that's why I think this case is really, really interesting. And it's really easy to sit here and say, big company bad, they shouldn't be able to do that. But when you get down to, okay, fine, it's bad, they can't do it, what does that mean? What it means is, and this is where I push back on antitrust folks saying, oh, we're just making the market work. No, antitrust is fundamentally altering the market. Like that's always the case. In this case, makes it crystal clear. The remedy that follows from this decision, in my estimation, is that an aggregator, a dominant player, can't contractually get this sort of privileged position. And why? Because the reality is, in any competition, Google's going to win. And because they will always win, it's de facto sort of locking in their position. But you have to be honest that, okay, if you say you can't bid, it's really unfair to Google, and it's revenue destructive, and like it's dead weight loss for everyone else in the ecosystem.